What would you do if a single decision, made in ignorance, unleashed a chain of events that could never be undone? On a crisp autumn morning, the rolling hills of my Montana ranch stretched out like a painting, the kind that makes you pause and breathe deeply. My name is Elias Thornton, and this land, hundreds of acres of wild grass and ancient oaks, has been in my family for 4 generations. It's more than a home. It's a legacy, a sanctuary for my herd of black Angus bulls, a rare breed protected by state law for their genetic purity and historical significance. But that morning, as the sun crept over the horizon, I had no idea that a stranger's arrogance would set in motion a tragedy that would shatter everything I held dear. Started with a phone call. My neighbor, Karen Whitmore, had moved to the adjacent property a year ago, a city transplant with a penchant for control and a disdain for rural life. She'd complained about my bulls before. Their lowing kept her awake, she said, and their grazing near her fence was unsightly. I tried to be patient, explaining their protected status, but Karen had a way of hearing only what she wanted. That morning, her voice was sharp through the receiver. Elias, I've got hunters coming onto my land today. They might cross your fence line. Just a heads up. Before I could respond, she hung up. Hunters? On her land, fine, but my property was off limits. I'd posted signs, reinforced fences, and made it clear to everyone in town. No hunting on Thornton land. My bulls weren't just livestock. They were a living piece of Montana's history, their lineage traceable to the 1800s. The state had strict laws. No one could harm them without facing felony charges. I grabbed my coat and headed out, my boots crunching on the frost-covered ground, a knot of unease tightening in my chest. By the time I reached the boundary fence, I saw them. 3 men in camo, rifles slung over their shoulders, trudging across Karen's field toward my land. Karen stood nearby, arms crossed, her blonde hair pulled tight in a bun, her face smug. I called out, "Hey, you can't hunt here. This is private property, and those bulls are protected." The hunters paused, glancing at each other, but Karen waved them on. "It's just a few deer, Elias. Don't make a fuss. They've got my permission." "Your permission doesn't mean a damn thing on my land," I shouted, striding toward her. She rolled her eyes, as if I were the one being unreasonable. "They're professionals," she said. "They know what they're doing." I turned to the hunters, my voice steady but firm. "You step 1 foot on my property, and I'm calling the sheriff. Those bulls are protected by law. You shoot one, you're looking at jail time." The lead hunter, a grizzled man named Hank, raised his hands. "We didn't know, man." She said it was all clear. He shot Karen a look, but she just shrugged. I thought that was the end of it. The hunters backed off, and I drove my ATV back to the house, fuming but relieved. Karen's ignorance was infuriating, but I figured she'd been put in her place. I was wrong. That afternoon, I met Lila, a wildlife biologist who'd been monitoring my bulls for the state. She was new to the area, a quiet woman with sharp eyes and a passion for conservation. She'd heard about the hunters from a local and came to check on the herd. "Elias," she said, her voice low, "I saw tracks near your eastern fence. Someone's been on your land." My stomach dropped. We hopped in her truck and sped to the far pasture, where my bulls usually grazed. The sight that greeted us stopped me cold. One of my bulls, Samson, lay sprawled in the grass, blood pooling beneath him. A bullet wound marred his flank, and his massive chest was still, his eyes glassy. Lila knelt beside him, her hands trembling as she checked for signs of life. "He's gone," she whispered. I felt like the ground had been ripped out from under me. Samson wasn't just a bull. He was the pride of my herd, a gentle giant whose lineage was irreplaceable. And now he was dead. Rage boiled in my chest, but it was laced with a sickening dread. I called the sheriff, and within an hour, the pasture was a crime scene. Deputies combed the area, and Lila documented the damage for her report. Karen arrived, her face pale, but her posture defiant. "I didn't know," she said before anyone could accuse her. "I told those hunters to stay on my land. They must have gotten confused." Her words were hollow, and I saw the flicker of guilt in her eyes. She knew she'd screwed up, but she wasn't about to admit it. The sheriff, a no-nonsense woman named Clara, wasn't buying it. "Ms. Whitmore," she said, "you gave those hunters access, knowing they might cross into protected land. That's reckless endangerment at best. And you're damn lucky it's not worse." Karen's lips tightened, but she said nothing. The hunters were tracked down later that day. Hank, the leader, confessed. Karen had told them the land was open for hunting, neglecting to mention the protected status of my bulls. They'd seen Samson through the trees and, thinking he was a wild animal, took the shot. But then came the twist I never saw coming. Lila, who'd been quiet through most of the investigation, pulled me aside. "Elias," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "I found something else." She led me to a thicket near the fence, where a small camera was hidden, its lens pointed at the pasture. "This isn't yours, is it?" she asked. I shook my head, my mind racing. Lila explained. The camera was a wildlife monitor, likely placed by poachers who'd been scoping my land for months. They weren't after deer, they were targeting my bulls, knowing their horns and hides could fetch a fortune on the black market. Karen's hunters weren't the only ones who'd been on my land that day. The realization hit like a punch. Karen's arrogance had opened the door, but someone else, someone calculating, had been waiting for an opportunity. The poachers had used the chaos of the hunter's presence to slip in, take their shot, and disappear. Samson's death wasn't just a mistake. It was a calculated theft, enabled by Karen's ignorance. The days that followed were a blur of grief and fury. The sheriff arrested the hunters for trespassing and illegal hunting, but the poachers remained at large. Karen faced charges for reckless endangerment, but her lawyer argued she hadn't pulled the trigger, and she got off with a fine and community service. She sold her property and left town, unable to face the neighbors who now saw her as the woman who'd brought death to Thornton land. Lila stayed on, helping me protect the remaining bulls. Her quiet strength became my anchor, but the loss of Samson haunted me. The state tightened regulations, and my herd was moved to a more secure location, but it felt like a hollow victory. Every time I walked the pasture, I saw Samson's massive form, his steady gaze, and I felt the weight of a legacy I'd failed to protect. In the end, it wasn't just about a bull or a piece of land. It was about trust in neighbors, in systems, in the idea that doing the right thing would be enough. Karen's carelessness and the poacher's greed stripped that away, leaving a wound that no law could heal. I still wake up some mornings, hoping to hear Samson's low bellow across the hills, but all I hear is silence. ND.